The wind howled a low, mournful note around the cinderblock exterior of the Blackwood Police Department, rattling the single-pane windows of the Detective Bureau. Inside, Detective Leo Maxwell, a man whose face had been etched into a permanent state of weary skepticism by 15 years on the force, was staring at a photograph. It wasn't a crime scene photo, not yet. It was a picture taken by a nervous rookie on a patrol shift, a snapshot of a front door. So, to recap, Miller, Leo said, not looking up, his voice a gravelly monotone. You and Officer Davies responded to a 911 hang-up. You found this address. And you saw, what, exactly? Officer Miller, barely 23, and still shiny with the idealism the job was determined to crush, shifted uncomfortably in the visitor's chair. Sir, the address was 404 Juniper Lane. The dispatch notes were garbled, just heavy breathing and static, then silence. When we got there, the house was dark. No car in the driveway. Everything seemed normal, except, he paused, swallowing hard, except. Leo prompted, his eyes finally lifting to meet the young officer's. Miller pointed a shaky finger at the photograph on the desk. The door, sir. The material, it wasn't wood. It wasn't fiberglass, or metal. It was this thick, dark gray substance. It looked wet. Like it was still setting. And it had these ridges, like muscle fibers pulled tight. And the smell, oh God, the smell. Describe the smell, Miller. Be specific, Leo ordered. It was meat, sir. Burnt, spoiled meat and ozone. Like a butchery that had been struck by lightning. Davies and I tried the knob. It was locked. We knocked. Nothing. We tried to radio in for a forced entry, but the moment Davies pressed the mic button, his radio just screamed. A high-pitched, metallic shriek that blew the speaker. Leo leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. A faulty radio. A new material for a door, maybe some avant-garde concrete blend. A bad smell. Miller, this sounds like a zoning violation, not a homicide. No, detective. That's not all, Miller insisted, his eyes wide. The address isn't in the system. When we ran the plate we did see a beat-up Ford pickup parked half a block away. The registration came back to a man named Silas Reed, who lives across town. But we drove past 404 Juniper Lane again this morning. And the house, it's gone. Leo frowned. Gone. You mean it burned down? Demolished. No, sir. The lot is gone. Where 404 Juniper Lane was last night, there's just an empty stretch of overgrown woods. Like the development stopped dead there 30 years ago. Just trees, brush, and silence. No foundation. No rubble. No sign a house ever stood there. Leo reached out and picked up the photograph. The gray, ridged, wet-looking door seemed to pulse under the harsh fluorescent light of the station. He flipped it over. Written on the back, in Miller's own hand, were the coordinates from the GPS tracker in the patrol car. You're sure about the coordinates, Miller? Positive, sir. I triple-checked them against the patrol log. That's exactly where we were. I even took a second photo before we left, a wide shot showing the porch and the yard. But when I checked my phone this morning, the second photo was just static. A corrupted file. Only the close-up of the door survived. Leo looked at the coordinates, then at the disturbing image of the door. An anomaly. A single, isolated incident that defied logic. He felt a familiar, cold prickle of intuition, the kind that usually led to something truly messy. All right, Miller. You and Davies take the day off. File this under unexplained property disappearance. I'll check the coordinates and the name, Silas Reed, myself. Don't talk about this to anyone. Not to dispatch, not to the union rep, not even to Davies. Understood. Miller nodded quickly, relief washing over his strained face. As the young officer left, Leo pulled out his personal phone and typed the coordinates into a satellite map app. The result popped up instantly, showing the dense green of the Blackwood State Forest. But overlaid on the GPS data, a faint, rectangular outline, the shadow of a structure, appeared, hovering like a watermark over the trees, and just above the outline, a small, blinking red dot, the registered address of the Ford pickup. 404 Juniper Lane, Leo felt the skepticism drain out of him, replaced by a cold knot of dread. He hadn't been looking at an ordinary door. He had been looking at a gateway. And the name Silas Reed, the registered owner of the car parked nearby, was now his first lead into something that was already spiraling far beyond the scope of local police work. Leo Maxwell drove his unmarked Crown Victoria, its suspension groaning under the weight of years and neglect, to the coordinates Miller had provided. The drive took him out of Blackwood's sleepy suburban grid and deep into the tangled, ancient growth of the state forest. The GPS led him to a narrow, unmarked dirt track barely visible from the main road. He killed the engine and stepped out, the silence of the woods immediately pressing in on him, heavy and oppressive. The air here was colder, and the faint, metallic scent Miller had described, spoiled meat and ozone, was undeniably present. Following the faint track, Leo found the beat-up Ford pickup. It sat parked haphazardly, tilted slightly into a ditch, the driver's side door ajar. Inside, the keys were in the ignition, and the truck was full of standard contractor equipment, tools, work boots, and an empty thermostat. He ran the plate again. Still Silas Reed, Leo drew his sidearm, the familiar weight a small comfort against the suffocating atmosphere of the forest. He moved around the truck and approached the dilapidated single-wide trailer tucked back amongst the pines. This must be the actual registered address, the permanent home of Silas Reed, not the phantom house at 404 Juniper Lane. The trailer door was unsecured. Leo pushed it open with his foot. The interior was a mess, but not a crime scene. It was the mess of a man who lived alone and didn't care for hygiene. Stacks of old magazines, empty beer cans, and a pervasive smell of stale cigarettes. In the small, dimly lit living room, Silas Reed was sitting on a stained sofa. He wasn't aggressive, or even resistant. He was simply staring at the wall, his eyes wide, dry, and fixed on something Leo couldn't see. Silas was a man in his late 40s, gaunt, with an overgrown, greasy beard and hands that trembled incessantly. Silas Reed? Leo asked, his voice firm and professional. Silas didn't move, but a small, wet sound escaped his throat. She told me not to open it. She told me the rules. But it was just knocking. Leo lowered his weapon slightly. Told you what, Silas? And who told you? Silas slowly turned his head. His eyes finally focused on Leo, but they looked straight through him. My wife. Martha. She always paid the rent. Paid the fees. Said the rent was compliance. Said as long as we kept the rules, the house would keep us safe. But the noise. The knocking, it was so close. And it wasn't wood. It was like a drum made of bone. Like something inside was trying to get out. What house, Silas? Juniper Lane. Leo pressed. The house changes. The numbers change. But the door is always the same, Silas whispered, his voice cracking. It finds us. If you break the rule, the door comes to you. We broke the rule. Leo sat down cautiously in a rickety chair across from him. What was the rule, Silas? Silas started to rock slowly, holding his stomach. The rule was simple. You lock the door. You never, ever look through the peephole after sundown. And you absolutely do not touch the mail slot, no matter what falls through it. What fell through it, Silas? Silas let out a choked sob. The package. It was heavy. It was wrapped in black plastic and tied with twine that smelled like copper. Martha screamed. She knew. She said, "They've raised the price, Silas. We can't pay it." She picked it up. It was leaking. Leo leaned forward, a wave of cold nausea washing over him. What was in the package, Silas? My son, Detective. My beautiful, sweet boy, Timmy. He disappeared from the park 5 years ago. Just vanished. The package was his hand. Still warm. Just his hand, cut clean at the wrist. And a note. Leo pulled his notebook. What did the note say? Silas began to hyperventilate, tears finally starting to track paths through the grime on his cheeks. The note said, "The balance is due. You have 24 hours to make the full payment. Compliance is the only key." Martha, she went crazy. She grabbed a hammer and ran outside, screaming, "I won't let you build it here again." Where did she go, Silas? Back to the house, he mumbled, pointing vaguely towards the woods. The one that appears when the balance is due. The one with the wet door. She said she was going to open it, to send it all back where it came from. I haven't seen her since. That was 2 nights ago. Leo stood up, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The details were too specific, too horrific, to be simple delusion. A missing boy, a severed hand, a phantom house that materialized and vanished according to a terrifying, unknown set of rules. "Silas, I need you to stay here. Don't move. I'm going to call for backup, but I have to check the area first." "No," Silas whispered, his eyes widening further, a new terror gripping him. "No, you can't go to the house. You don't have the key. And you don't know the price. If you knock, it'll open. And if it opens, you'll become part of the structure." She knew. That's why she went. Leo ignored him, stepping back out into the woods. He looked at the GPS coordinates on his phone. The outline of the rectangular structure was blinking rapidly now, an alert in the digital ether. He took a deep breath, re-gripped his weapon, and headed into the trees, toward the patch of ground where the officers had seen the door, where Martha Reed had gone to confront a monstrous debt, and where a house waited, built of something far worse than wood and stone. Leo pushed through the dense undergrowth, his uniform catching on thorny vines. The metallic, spoiled scent grew stronger, mixed now with a sharp, mineral tang like fresh earth and iron. He reached the coordinates. There was no house. Just a small, circular clearing carpeted in moss and dead leaves, surrounded by a ring of identical, ancient pines. It was intensely silent here, the kind of silence that feels actively manufactured, like a bubble separating this space from the rest of the world. Leo checked his phone again. The GPS still insisted he was standing exactly within the phantom outline of 404 Juniper Lane. He lowered his gun, scanning the perimeter. Nothing. Then he saw it wasn't a structure, but a displacement. In the center of the clearing, the ground was disturbed. It looked like a patch of freshly poured concrete, except the color was a dark, unsettling gray, matching the material Miller had described. It was a perfect rectangle, about the size of a door laid flat. And it was slightly damp. Leo cautiously stepped closer. He knelt down, testing the surface with the tip of his boot. It was hard, dense, and had the faint, fleshy texture of the door in the photograph. It was the footprint of the house, the residual shadow left behind. As he examined the gray slab, his gaze fell on something resting in the center. It was a hammer, Martha Reed's hammer, its handle smeared with the same dark, unsettling substance as the ground, and next to the hammer lay the key. It wasn't a metal key. It was a small, desiccated object, about 3 inches long, shaped roughly like a primitive lever. It was pale white and slightly porous, the texture reminding Leo sickeningly of old ivory or bleached bone. It was too light to be bone, however. It was rigid, but clearly organic. He hesitated, then pulled on a pair of latex gloves and gingerly picked it up. As soon as his gloved fingers made contact, the object pulsed, not physically, but in his mind. He felt a sudden, fleeting rush of information, an image of a ledger, written in blood-red ink, listing names and dates, and beside each name, a number, a price. And behind the ledger, a vast, complex architecture of interconnected rooms, expanding endlessly, built not of brick and mortar, but of debt and compliance. He dropped the key instantly, his heart hammering in his chest. The pulse stopped. The vision vanished. "What the hell are you?" he muttered, staring at the small, repulsive object. Leo radioed for backup, keeping his voice carefully neutral. He requested a hazmat team and a specialized forensic unit, citing possible contamination and unexplained organic material at a remote woodland site. He deliberately left out the part about the disappearing house and the bone key.as he waited. He used a camera to document the clearing, the slab, the hammer, and the key. He then carefully bagged the key and the hammer as evidence. He walked back to the trailer to check on Silas Reed, expecting to find them in catatonic or gone. Silas was gone, the trailer was empty. The sofa where he had sat was now covered in a slick, dark fluid that smelled strongly of ammonia and decay. It wasn't blood, but it was thick, viscous, and seemed to be slowly absorbing into the worn fabric. On the small kitchen table, where Silas had presumably been sitting before his disappearance, a new note was left. It was written hastily in black permanent marker on the back of an old utility bill. It read, "They paid. The ledger is settled. They've found a new collector. You opened the door. The house is coming for its key, detective." A chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature shot down Leo's spine. He hadn't opened the door. But by taking the key, he had signaled his awareness, his compliance, and perhaps his eligibility. He looked down at the evidence bag containing the small, white, organic key. It was warm now, even through the latex and the plastic. Leo knew the backup team wouldn't arrive for at least 40 minutes. He had a brief window of time before his superiors and the forensic circus descended on this location, potentially contaminating the entire nightmare. He had to use that time to find out what the house was, and what its price was, before he, too, became part of its horrifying ledger. He headed back into the woods, following the faintest trail that led away from the trailer and the clearing, deciding to track the path Silas might have taken. The phantom house might be gone, but the threads connecting its victims to it were still very much present. He had a key, and now, he needed a lock. Leo ignored the frantic radio calls from the incoming units and followed the faint, broken trail away from the trailer park. Silas Reed hadn't walked away. The trail showed clear signs of dragging and stumbling, ending abruptly at a thick cluster of old, twisted black locust trees. There, wedged between two roots, Leo found a small, tarnished silver locket. It was feminine, delicate, and clearly belonged to Martha Reed. He opened it carefully. Inside, instead of a photograph, was a tightly folded, aged piece of paper. The handwriting was neat, precise, and obsessive. Martha's. It wasn't a diary entry or a farewell letter. It was a map. The map was crudely drawn but incredibly detailed, focusing on the surrounding Blackwood area. It showed roads, landmarks, and utility lines. But Martha had overlaid this reality with a second layer of cartography, marked in aggressive red ink, a network of circles, lines, and cryptic symbols. The most prominent feature was a series of 4 large circles, labeled A, B, C, and D, connected by zigzagging lines. Circle A was the trailer park, Silas and Martha's home. It was marked with a crossed-out number, 404. Circle B was the clearing, the location where the house had last materialized. It was marked with a symbol that looked like a stylized, wide-open eye. Circle C was located deep within a defunct quarry on the other side of the forest. Next to it, Martha had scribbled one word, archive. Circle D was centered on a large, institutional building on the edge of town, the old, abandoned Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital, closed since the 1980s. This circle had a disturbing notation, reckoning point, high price. Connecting all these points were thick red lines, which Martha had annotated with chilling descriptors, the conduits, silent transfer routes, and most ominously, the house walks here. Leo realized this wasn't a map of physical locations, it was a map of the house's movements and its victims. Martha Reed had been tracking the entity that was demanding payment for their life, trying to predict its next emergence. He refolded the map, placing it in an evidence bag with the key. The key felt even warmer now, burning through the plastic. The sounds of sirens, still distant but growing louder, finally penetrated the forest's silence. Leo knew he had minutes before the first patrol cars arrived. He couldn't let them find him here with the key and the map. The sheer absurdity of the evidence would either get him locked up or buried in bureaucratic red tape. He made a decision. He would use the time until the forensics team took over the trailer park site to pursue Martha's first new lead, the archive at the quarry, Circle C. He sprinted back to his car, using his radio one last time to call his captain, claiming he had an urgent, personal emergency and was temporarily leaving the site investigation in the hands of the first responding officer, Detective Anya Sharma, who he knew was on the inbound unit. It was a lie that would cost him his badge, but he was beyond caring about procedure. As he sped away from the forest, heading towards the quarry, he glanced down at the map. The archive at Circle C was marked with a small, neat drawing, a padlock. Leo touched the organic key in the evidence bag beside him. It was a key unlike any other, made of compliance and fear. He wondered what kind of lock it was meant to open in an archive built of debt. He gripped the steering wheel tight. He was no longer investigating a missing person case. He was pursuing a financial entity that collected debts in flesh and grief, and the first step was deciphering the notes of the woman who had spent years trying to map its architecture. The defunct Blackwood Quarry was a vast, scarred amphitheater of gray shale and stagnant water, its silence broken only by the distant squawk of gulls circling overhead. The GPS led Leo to the very edge of the deepest pit, where the ground sloped sharply downward toward a black pool. According to Martha Reed's map, the archive, Circle C, was here. Leo parked his car discreetly behind a pile of earth movers and approached the cliff face. The quarry walls were sheer, cold stone, marked with drill holes and the rust-colored streaks of iron runoff. He scanned the wall, following Martha's crude, red ink diagram. The line on the map ended precisely where a deep fissure, hidden by years of rockfall and overgrowth, sliced into the stone. He pulled away some dead vines and loose rock to reveal a narrow opening, a cave, or more likely, a former storage tunnel blasted out during the quarry's operation decades ago. The metallic, organic scent, the one he now associated with the house, was powerful here. Like standing in a closed room with a rotting carcass, Leo switched on his flashlight and stepped inside the tunnel. The air was instantly heavy, thick with moisture and the smell of ozone. The tunnel was rough-hewn, dropping steeply before opening into a larger cavern deep underground. When Leo's beam swept across the cavern wall, he stopped dead. This was the archive. It wasn't a collection of files or shelves. The cavern walls were meticulously covered, floor to ceiling, in thick sheets of dark, synthetic plastic, stretched taut and sealed at the seams with heavy-duty black tape. Behind the plastic, the wall was not rock, but something else. Martha Reed had found a place where the house manifested its paperwork. Cautiously, Leo moved the light beam closer. The plastic sheeting wasn't just protective, it was holding something in. The surface bulged slightly, rippling as if pressurized. He found the entrance to the archive proper, a heavy, steel security door, of the kind used in bank vaults, recessed into the far end of the cavern. It was sealed tight with a massive combination lock. Above the vault door, scratched into the rock face in Martha's frantic handwriting, was a final, desperate warning. The house is a system. It feeds the price back into the foundation. This is where it keeps the blueprints. The key is the debt itself. The key opens the vault. You have to pay to enter. Leo reached for the organic key in his evidence bag. He looked at the heavy steel vault door, then at the pulsating, porous key. How could a piece of calcified organic material open a lock that weighed a ton? He held the key up to the security door. Nothing. Then, he remembered Martha's map. Circle A was marked with a crossed-out number, 404. And the number on the note from Silas was the number of hours they had to pay, 24. He realized that payment wasn't a physical act, it was an act of compliance with the house's rules. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Leo placed the tip of the organic key against the combination dial of the massive lock. As he did, the key began to glow faintly white. He heard a soft, wet squelching sound, and the key felt instantly hot in his gloved hand. He didn't know the combination. But the house knew its price. Leo slowly turned the dial, feeling an unbearable pressure build in his skull. He was listening to the key. He heard whispers in his mind, fragmented names, dates of disappearance, and monetary figures, not dollars, but terrifying, abstract valuations of human life. He felt the cold mathematics of the ledger. He turned the dial. He wasn't entering numbers, he was entering debt. Click. The tumblers in the lock fell in sequence, a dry, metallic sound of finality. The faint glowing stopped. The key, now slightly warm, had done its work. With a deep, resonant thunk, the vault door swung inward, revealing not a room, but a tunnel leading down into utter blackness. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and carried a profound weight of ancient despair. Leo stepped inside, flashlight raised. He was beyond police work now. He was descending into the actual infrastructure of the horror. The tunnel beyond the vault door was narrow and descended sharply, its walls no longer natural stone, but smooth, unnervingly white porcelain. It was like walking down the throat of some immense, sterile organism. Leo felt the air pressure drop significantly. The organic key, still clutched in his hand, pulsed with a dull, low thrum. The tunnel opened into a massive, circular chamber. It was brightly, unsettlingly lit by rows of humming fluorescent bulbs that cast a harsh, institutional glow over everything. This was the core of the archive. The walls were lined with thousands upon thousands of identical, floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets. They were all uniformly steel gray, perfectly aligned, and completely unmarked. They stretched away into the gloom, suggesting an archive of unfathomable size. In the center of the chamber sat a single, enormous, polished steel desk, lit by a surgical lamp, and on the desk lay the ledger. It wasn't a book. It was a tablet, a foot thick and made of the same dark, wet-looking material as the door Miller had photographed. It looked heavy, dense, and deeply unsettling. Leo approached the desk slowly, his steps echoing unnaturally in the sterile space. He placed his flashlight down and reached out, touching the cold, slightly yielding surface of the ledger. Instantly, the entire surface of the tablet rippled, and text began to appear across it, glowing faintly in a deep, blood-red hue. It was a digital manifestation of the horrific bookkeeping Silas had described. The text was a dizzying scroll of names, dates, and transactions. Leo frantically scanned the list, looking for a pattern, a method to the madness. He saw names of missing persons from Blackwood spanning back over 50 years. Beside each name was a detailed list of services rendered to the victims, things like financial stabilization, residential relocation, or emotional sanctuary, and next to the services, the terrifying price. The price was never money. It was always a fraction or an abstract measurement. Subject 124A, disappeared 1982, price paid, $1.0. Youth. Subject 307F, disappeared 1999, price paid, 0.5 years of unearned life. Subject 611G, disappeared 2011, price paid, 0.25 units of undisturbed sleep. Then, he found them. Case file 901. Our principal debtor, Martha Reed, Silas Reed, service rendered, initial 5 years of uninterrupted domestic tranquility, initial payment, 1.0 unit of future hope, first delinquency, 2020 failure. To maintain Rule 3, no mail slot contact, default penalty, 1.0 unit of biological product, Timmy Reed, index finger. Balance partially restored. Leo's eyes burned as he read the cold, clinical assessment of their tragedy. The house wasn't a monster, it was an interdimensional loan shark, trading in abstract human resources. He scrolled further, his gloved fingers trembling on the slick surface of the ledger, looking for the most recent entry. He found it. Case file 901R, final entry, default penalty, Martha Reed, attempted structural interference, payment due, full compliance, collector assigned. Detective Leo Maxwell, final payment status, pending. The house has come to retrieve the key and absorb the collector. Into the foundation. A horrifying realization dawned. The house didn't just want the key back. By taking the key and attempting to understand the system, Leo had inserted himself into the ledger. He was now the active collection agent, and his life was the final, full payment required to settle the Reed family's entire debt. He spun around, suddenly aware of the echoing silence. The heavy vault door was still slightly ajar, but he could hear a low, rhythmic thump-thump-thump resonating from the tunnel. It wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something vast, heavy, and complex moving outside. The house was here. It had walked the conduits on Martha's map and found its archive, and its new collector. Leo snatched up the organic key and the flashlight. He couldn't fight an infrastructure. He had to disrupt the system. He scrolled back to Martha Reed's final entry. Below the horrifying words, Martha had managed to scrawl a small, defiant message in faded red ink, somehow embedded in the ledger's code. The price is always the most valuable thing you hold. For me, it was acceptance. For them, it will be the truth. Find D. Circle D, the abandoned psychiatric hospital. The reckoning point. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, and the white porcelain walls of the tunnel began to subtly vibrate. Leo didn't hesitate. He knew the building, the old hospital. It was a vast, forgotten structure built on decades of despair and untold human misery. If the house needed a place to calculate its highest price, that was it. He sprinted back out of the archive, slamming the steel vault door shut behind him and scrambling back up the narrow tunnel, driven by the certainty that he had only one chance to stop the house from settling its terrifying account. Leo burst out of the quarry tunnel, gasping for breath, the cold night air a shock after the stale heat of the archive. The sirens of the police backup were gone, replaced by the deep, resonant thudding sound that was now impossibly close. He looked back at the cliff face. The entire fissure where the vault was hidden seemed to be shimmering, the rock surface vibrating violently as if something massive was pushing through from the other side. He didn't need to see the house to know it was moving. He had a terrifying understanding now. The house was not a structure, it was a phenomenon, a localized field of applied, organic bookkeeping that manifested physical form when a debt was called due. He jumped into his Crown Vic and roared out of the quarry, heading toward Martha's final mark, Circle D, the abandoned Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. The hospital sat on the highest hill overlooking the town, a sprawling complex of gray stone and broken windows, perpetually shrouded in mist. It was a local legend, a place of historical cruelty and lingering dread. Leo arrived and scaled the rusted wrought iron fence. He entered the main administration building through a shattered window. The interior was silent, steeped in the smell of dust, decay, and old medication. Moonlight filtered through the broken panes, casting long, skeletal shadows across the peeling linoleum floors. He drew his sidearm, moving with practiced caution, but expecting something far worse than a standard intruder. He was looking for a physical manifestation of the house's infrastructure. He found it in the hospital's central atrium, beneath a massive, ornate dome that had once housed a chapel. The house hadn't appeared as a full structure. Instead, a vast, pulsating wall of the dark, wet, ridged material had manifested, rising 40 feet high, bisecting the atrium. It was the same organic building material Miller had first described, now spread across a massive surface area, radiating a low, internal heat. As Leo approached, he saw that the wall wasn't solid. Hundreds of faces, distorted and pressed flat against the surface, were visible in the fleshy material, the faces of the debtors, those who had become part of the foundation. Among them, Leo could clearly recognize the gaunt, horrified features of Silas Reed, frozen in a silent scream. He was the foundation. Suddenly, a voice cut through the heavy silence. "You have the key." Leo spun around, weapon raised. Standing in the shadow of a collapsed stairway was a woman, frail and stooped, dressed in tattered, decades-old hospital scrubs. Her hair was white, and her eyes were startlingly clear and lucid. "Who are you?" Leo demanded. "My name is Agnes," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I was a patient here, in '84. They called me delusional. But I knew the walls were listening. I knew the doctors were taking payments. You know about the house?" Agnes stepped into the moonlight, pointing a trembling finger at the massive, pulsating wall. "It used this place, detective. This was its first permanent address in Blackwood. The pain, the compliance, the acceptance of being ignored, that was the lowest price. They used the patient's despair as the foundation for the first ledger. The house calls this the reckoning point because this is where the old debts were paid. And where the new one is finalized." She looked pointedly at the key in Leo's hand. "It wants that back, detective. That key is proof of compliance. It wants you to surrender it." Martha Reed said the price for the house would be the truth. What did she mean? Leo asked, remembering the cryptic note on the ledger. Agnes stared at the wall of faces, her expression hardening with resolve. The house is sustained by the lie that its system is fair and its debts are valid. The truth is that the price is arbitrary and the system can be corrupted. The lowest price built the foundation here. The highest price will tear it down. What is the highest price? Agnes gave a slight, chilling smile. You have to find the oldest contract. The one that established the first debt. It's here, in this building. It's what allowed them to build a foundation using human despair. It's the original lie. The pulsating wall behind them suddenly released a high-pitched, metallic shriek. The faces pressed in the membrane rippled violently, as if disturbed by the very mention of the original lie. Agnes grabbed Leo's arm with surprising strength. Hurry! The main ledger is stabilizing its final transaction. Find the lowest price and convert it to the highest, the truth. The oldest contract is kept in the records room, basement level. Go now. I'll distract it. Agnes turned, walking directly towards the undulating, horrifying wall of flesh, chanting a series of low, angry phrases. The wall roared, the sound like grinding stone and torn metal, and a single, wet appendage lashed out from the surface, obscuring her from view. Leo didn't wait. He plunged into the darkness of the ruined building, heading down toward the basement, guided by the desperate courage of a woman who had spent 40 years charting the true cost of her institutionalization. Leo navigated the ruins of the hospital's basement, a labyrinth of flooded corridors and derelict utility pipes. The building's foundation was stone, but the air here was thick with the strange, mineral ozone smell of the house. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic thudding directly above him, confirming that the main, organic wall was situated right over the basement. He finally located the records room. The heavy steel door was warped and slightly ajar, indicating the structural stresses the building was currently undergoing. Inside, the room was a disaster zone. Decades of patient files, administrative records, and financial documents were strewn across the floor, moldering in the damp air. Leo scanned the mess quickly, looking for anything that predated the official closure of the hospital in the mid-1980s. He knew he was looking for the original contract, the event that established the low price and allowed the house to integrate with the structure. Deep in a rusted filing cabinet, he found a metal box labeled Admin/Financial, 1948. He tore the box open. Inside were ledgers bound in thick, cracking leather, documenting the hospital's earliest financial transactions. He found the one marked Endowment and Expansion Ledger. Flipping through the brittle, yellowed pages, he finally found the entry, the foundational debt. The date was October 12, 1948. The entry detailed a massive, unauthorized loan taken out by the hospital's original administrator, Dr. Alistair Finch, to secretly finance the hospital's expansion without government oversight. The payment terms were unlike anything Leo had ever seen. Creditor, the proprietor, notation, unidentified/non-traditional, principal, $1 million, value at time of transaction, collateral, full and unquestioning access to the subjective compliance of the institution's patient population, repayment. Schedule, perpetual. The collateral serves as the perpetual low price. Should the compliance be broken or the truth of the transaction revealed, the principal debtor's immediate lineage and all succeeding associated personnel, foundations, will be called to full reckoning. Highest price. The lowest price Agnes had mentioned was the suffering, despair, and forced compliance of thousands of mental patients. The house had been feeding on that despair for over 50 years. Leo realized the full horror. Dr. Finch had effectively sold the souls of his patients to fund a brick-and-mortar expansion, and the house, the proprietor, had been collecting the interest ever since, demanding flesh and life, like Timmy Reed's hand. Only when the debtors started questioning the system. The key to destroying the system was the clause, should the compliance be broken or the truth of the transaction revealed, the principal debtor's immediate lineage and all succeeding associated personnel will be called to full reckoning. Highest price. Leo knew he couldn't just tell people the truth, he had to physically use the ledger's power, the organic key, to force the system to acknowledge the truth of the original lie. But how? The ledger in the quarry was miles away. He looked around the records room. On a shelf, he found a dusty, antique dictaphone, a relic of the hospital's past. A horrifying, earth-shattering crack split the air above him. The floor groaned, and dust and plaster rained down. The house was moving, shifting its weight, preparing to finalize Leo's final payment status. He quickly grabbed the dictaphone and a clean sheet of paper. He had to record the contract and use the only piece of the house's active technology he possessed, the organic key, to inject the truth back into the foundation itself. He placed the organic key, still faintly warm, onto the table. Then, he laid the original contract out, turned on the dictaphone, and began reading the terrifying terms aloud, emphasizing the key clauses about the collateral and the full reckoning. As he spoke, the organic key on the table began to heat up violently. It wasn't glowing white this time, it was turning an angry, pulsing Red, absorbing the weight and reality of the original lie. When he finished reading, the key was scorching hot. He quickly snatched it up with a protective fold of paper. He had just armed the weapon, a piece of the house's infrastructure, now saturated with the truth of its own corrupt founding debt. He had to get to the largest, most active part of the foundation to make the payment. He had to get back to the pulsating wall in the chapel. Leo scrambled back through the decaying corridors, the dictaphone clutched in one hand, the scorching hot organic key wrapped in cloth in the other. Above him, the building groaned and shifted with an unholy sound, like a vast stomach digesting itself. Plaster rained down in chunks. He burst back into the main atrium. The scene was chaos. The massive, undulating wall of flesh and faces now completely dominated the space. It had grown, pushing against the ancient stone architecture, distorting the very fabric of the building. Cracks spiderwebbed across the dome, and sections of the floor had buckled. Agnes was nowhere to be seen. Her distraction had bought him time, but at what cost? The faces in the wall, Silas, Timmy, hundreds of others, were contorted in agony, their silent screams now palpable. A deep, guttural hum emanated from the entire structure, growing in intensity. This was the house. And it was preparing to collect. Leo knew his plan was a desperate long shot. He had to force the house to acknowledge the highest price by injecting the truth of its original contract directly into its active foundation. He found a section of the wall that was pulsating particularly violently, where the faces seemed most prominent. He held up the organic key, which was now radiating an intense, almost painful heat, its surface a sickly, angry red. He pressed play on the dictaphone. The tinny, crackling voice of Leo Maxwell, reading the cold, clinical terms of the 1948 original contract, filled the cavernous atrium. Creditor, the proprietor. Collateral, full and unquestioning access to the subjective compliance of the institution's patient population. Repayment schedule, perpetual. Should the compliance be broken or the truth of the transaction revealed, the principal debtor's immediate lineage and all succeeding associated personnel, foundations, will be called to full reckoning. Highest price. The moment the dictaphone's voice began to echo, a violent tremor shook the entire hospital. The organic wall screamed, a high, piercing wail that was both mechanical and animalistic. The faces within it distorted, not in agony, but in a sudden, terrifying recognition. The red glow of the organic key intensified. Leo, ignoring the searing pain, plunged the red-hot key directly into the pulsating flesh of the wall. It didn't just pierce the surface, it sunk in, dissolving into the living membrane as if it were butter. A torrent of energy erupted from the point of contact. The entire wall began to glow with the same angry, pulsing red, and the hum intensified into a deafening roar. The faces inside started to melt, their features running like wax, reforming into new, horrifying configurations. The house was reacting. It was processing the truth of its own fraudulent foundation. The building around them could not withstand the strain. Cracks tore through the dome, and large sections of the ceiling began to collapse. The floor beneath Leo's feet buckled, sending him stumbling. The organic wall, no longer stable, began to convulse violently. Large sections of its fleshy material started to peel away from the stone, tearing with a wet, ripping sound. The house was trying to shed the infection, the truth that threatened its existence, but it was too late. The full reckoning had been triggered. Leo looked up, shielding his head as debris rained down. The collapsing dome revealed the moonless, starless night sky. He could hear the sound of approaching sirens, closer this time, and the frantic shouts of his fellow officers from outside. He stumbled towards the nearest exit, the hospital itself now a death trap. As he reached the shattered doorway, he risked one last glance back at the chapel. The organic wall was not just peeling, it was imploding. It was retracting into itself, sucking in the faces, the material, the hum, like a black hole devouring its own light. The very air in the atrium seemed to be pulled inward, leaving a vacuum of silence and stillness in its wake. Then, with a final, violent thud, the entire structure of the wall collapsed inward, leaving behind nothing but a gaping hole in the floor, descending into absolute darkness. The light and sound were gone. The house had vanished. Leo staggered out of the hospital, blinking in the sudden glare of flashing blue and red lights. He was covered in dust, sweat, and a chilling residue of the organic material. His hands were raw, one still clenching the now inert dictaphone. He had exposed the house's original lie. But at what cost? The collapsing hospital was a testament to the destruction he had wrought. He was met by Detective Anya Sharma, her face a mask of concern and anger. Maxwell. What the hell happened here? We heard screams, and then that roar. The entire hill just shook. Leo looked back at the ruined hospital, then down at the dictaphone. The truth had been revealed. The house had been forced to acknowledge its fraud. The reckoning had been paid. But the question remained, had it been destroyed, or merely displaced? And what about the people who had been its foundation, the faces in the wall? He knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that his part in the house's ledger was far from over. The ensuing days were a blur of police reports, structural engineering assessments, and psychological evaluations. Leo Maxwell was suspended indefinitely. His story, a phantom house, organic walls, a key made of bone, and a 60-year-old contract, was met with professional skepticism and pity. The official story became a massive, unexplained structural failure within the abandoned hospital, possibly triggered by recent seismic activity, amplified by neglect. The disappearance of Silas and Martha Reed and the report from Officer Miller were buried under the overwhelming physical reality of the hospital collapse. Leo held on to the only two pieces of physical evidence he had left, the antique dictaphone and the original contract, both deemed irrelevant historical documents by the investigating task force. The organic key had vanished, dissolved into the house's receding material. He spent his suspension holed up in his apartment, revisiting the only other person connected to the case, Agnes. He managed to pull her archived patient file from the Blackwood State Records, a monumental effort involving bureaucratic loopholes and a carefully crafted lie about an insurance liability case. Agnes's file was extensive and disturbing, filled with archaic notes on her paranoid delusions regarding the hospital's architecture and the doctor's collection system. But Leo now read the file not as a record of madness, but as a meticulously documented history of the house's first local emergence. He found a small, personal diary bound into the back of her file, written in a tight, nearly illegible script. .1 entry, dated 1983, gave him a profound chill. They tried to make me pay the price. The price for my freedom was my acceptance that their suffering was necessary. I refused. I never complied. So they couldn't build me into the wall. I am a free variable. I broke the rule, and the door came to me, but I did not take the mail. They locked me in the basement, but I watched. I watched the walls take the others. And I learned their rules. Rule 0, they need a collector. They will always leave a collector behind to manage the remaining debts. When the foundation collapses, the collector becomes the new seed. Leo dropped the file. Rule 0, they need a collector. He remembered the final entry on the ledger he saw in the quarry, collector assigned, Detective Leo Maxwell. He hadn't stopped the house, he had simply triggered the full reckoning, which destroyed the old foundation, the hospital, and forced the system to designate a new anchor, him. He had become the new seed, the walking address for the house's next manifestation. The police had dismissed the organic material, the strange residue, as biocontaminants from the old hospital labs. But Leo knew better. He was still faintly smelling that metallic, ozone meat scent, and it wasn't coming from his clothes. It was coming from him. He rushed to his bathroom mirror. He scrubbed his face, looking for the residue, for any sign of the organic corruption. He found it not on his skin, but in it. On the back of his right hand, covering the knuckle where he had gripped the organic key, was a small, nearly invisible mark. It wasn't a cut or a burn. It was a subtle patch of skin where the pores were slightly too large, the color too gray, a minuscule, unsettling patch of the same texture as the door and the wall. It was the faintest trace of the foundation. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was an alert from the department. A dispatch message had been forwarded to his suspended email account, a non-standard protocol, highly unusual. The message was brief and chilling, logged at 2:37 a.m., unit, unassigned. Code, 911 hang up. Location, 317 Elm Street. Unit is advised, checking in on the new property owner. 317 Elm Street. Leo didn't live at 317 Elm Street. He lived at 145 Oak Lane, but he had checked his property records just last week, following standard police procedure when preparing his leave of absence. And in a dizzying moment of disorientation, he remembered seeing the address on a property tax. Bill while cleaning his desk, the deed to his own small, single-family home had been quietly and inexplicably updated in the county records 2 months ago. The new primary address was listed as 317 Elm Street. Leo looked down at his hand, at the tiny patch of gray, ridged skin. He was the collector. And the house had just announced its next location. Leo grabbed his jacket and his personal sidearm. He couldn't call the department, he was a liability, and any interference might push the house to accelerate its schedule. He was the only one who understood the rules of the game. He drove to 317 Elm Street, a respectable, quiet neighborhood 5 miles across town. When he arrived, the house was dark, but it was not his house. The structure at 317 Elm Street was an unfamiliar 2-story colonial, perfectly manicured, with a pristine white fence. It was completely unlike his old, run-down single-family home. Yet, according to the county records, this was now his address. Leo approached the front walk, the air here feeling normal, clean, and suburban. Too normal. He reached the front porch. The door was the only thing that was wrong. It wasn't the wet, gray, pulsating material he expected. It was a beautiful, solid oak door, impeccably varnished and fitted with brass hardware, but as Leo reached for the knob, his gaze fell on the polished brass mail slot. It was exactly the kind of slot Silas Reed had described, functional, unassuming, and deadly. He saw a faint sliver of white paper sticking out of the aperture. He remembered Martha Reed's rule, and you absolutely do not touch the mail slot, no matter what falls through it. Leo pulled on a pair of leather gloves, unwilling to risk direct contact. He used a pen to gently hook the edge of the paper and pull it out. It was a standard-looking utility bill from a company he didn't recognize, Compliance and Foundations Utility Services. He flipped it over. Written on the back, in the familiar, neat script he had seen in Agnes's file, was a note: "Welcome to the Foundation, Detective Maxwell. The house is a system. It requires a permanent, active address. Since the old site was compromised by the truth, you have been integrated as the new collector/anchor to manage the ongoing ledger. You possess the highest knowledge of its operations, therefore you are the highest value collateral. The rule for the new collector is singular and absolute: you must maintain the structure. No delinquency. Your initial payment is due in 24 hours. Leo crumpled the note, a knot of icy terror forming in his gut. The house hadn't been destroyed, it had simply outsourced the job to him. He looked around the quiet, sleeping neighborhood. He wasn't just living in the house, he was the guardian of the structure, the gatekeeper to the house's ledger. Suddenly, a small motion caught his eye. A curtain on the second floor of the house across the street twitched. A neighbor was watching him. Leo walked off the porch, feeling the weight of the new foundation settle over him. He knew the house had to be communicating with him in a way that circumvented the rules of the material world. He walked around to the side of the house, toward a small, fenced-in backyard. It was here that he found his true property line. The backyard ended abruptly at a perfect, 10-foot-high wall of the hideous, gray, ridged organic material. It pulsed with a low, deep energy, humming faintly in the night air. The wall looked like the collapsed foundation from the hospital, only this time it was contained, neatly built into the property line. It was like a segment of the vanished house had been surgically transplanted into his new yard, and leaning against the wall, stood a figure. It was Agnes. She was unharmed, wearing the same tattered scrubs. She looked older, friendlier, but her eyes held a spark of knowing defiance. "They couldn't hold me," she whispered, gesturing toward the wall. "I was never on the ledger. I was the anomaly. But you, detective, you are the collector now. What is the initial payment?" Leo demanded, pointing at the wall. "What do they want from me in 24 hours? Agnes stepped closer to the wall, touching the wet, ridged surface with a long, careful finger. "You brought the truth into the foundation. Now, they demand a payment to restore the lie. They need something of absolute, non-compliance value. They need your skepticism, detective. The one thing that kept you safe and detached. How do I pay that?" Agnes looked him in the eye, her expression grave. "You have to let the house convince someone else to comply. You have to bring the next person to the door, make them question reality, and then let the house take their belief. You have to create the new debt." She pointed toward the house across the street, where the curtain had twitched. The one watching you. She's the next prospective debtor. Her name is Sarah. She's a single mother, struggling with payments. She is ripe for residential relocation services. You are the one who has to hand her the invitation. That is the initial payment to the foundation you now own. Leo stared at the wall, then at Agnes, then back at the neighbor's house. He was faced with an impossible choice: become a monster to survive, or refuse, leading to the collapse of his own structure and the immediate, terrifying full reckoning on his life. Leo stared at Agnes, then at the organic wall humming in his new backyard. The knowledge he possessed, the truth of the ledger, the names of the victims, the corrupt origins of the house, was now his highest vulnerability. If I refuse, Leo said, his voice flat, the house takes me. It collapses the structure, and I become the new foundation material, paying the highest price. Yes, Agnes confirmed quietly. And the price for the truth is total destruction of the collector. You can't let it win. But you also can't let it continue. Leo looked across the street. He could see a light flick on in the kitchen of Sarah's house, the single mother Agnes had pointed out. She was probably making coffee, unaware that she had been designated the next collateral. He was a detective. His life was built on protecting people from predatory systems. If he brought Sarah to the door, he would be doing the exact opposite. He would be trading her soul for his own survival. He looked back at the organic wall. It was a segment of the house's ledger, a localized debt sink. He had the truth of the original contract stored on the dictaphone. There's another way to pay the debt, Leo murmured, his eyes fixed on the pulsing gray material. The payment must restore the lie. The opposite of the lie is the truth. He pulled the dictaphone from his jacket. If I pay the initial debt with the truth, I collapse the system. But if the system is designed to use the highest price against the debtor, then I need a way to pay the highest price without destroying the collector. Agnes watched him, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the organic wall. You are the collector, detective. Your payment is your noncompliance, but the foundation will kill you for that. Leo looked at his hand, at the gray, ridged patch of skin. He realized the real key: the foundation of the house wasn't the material or the ledger, it was the lie of the contract. He had to pay the highest price without fully complying or fully rebelling. He walked over to the wall, holding the dictaphone. The house needs my skepticism to sustain the lie, Leo stated. It needs me to believe in its system so I can enforce it. The highest price it can charge me is the complete loss of my belief in its power, while still maintaining the structure. He pressed the dictaphone against the organic wall and pressed play. The crackling voice of Leo reading the original contract, the truth, began to reverberate against the material. The wall screamed, the high, piercing wail tearing through the suburban silence. The humming intensified, and the material began to violently shrink and pull away from the property line. As the wall imploded, Leo raised his sidearm and fired a single, deliberate shot, not at the wall, but at the dictaphone. The dictaphone shattered, silencing the truth forever. The organic wall instantly ceased its implosion. It didn't vanish entirely, nor did it collapse. It simply froze, a 10-foot section of petrified, gray, ridged material, now cold and utterly silent. It was a trophy of his defiance. Agnes watched in stunned silence. What did you do? I introduced the truth, triggering the full reckoning, Leo explained, his adrenaline spiking. Then, at the point of collapse, I destroyed the source of the truth. The house got the highest price, the full knowledge of its own lie, but it didn't get the destruction it craved. It didn't get the death of the collector. It got gridlock. He continued, looking down at his hand. The gray patch of skin was still there. I paid the price of my skepticism. By proving I was willing to sacrifice the evidence, the truth, to save myself and the structure, I showed them I still valued survival over righteousness. I didn't become a monster, but I didn't break the rules completely either. I became a bad investment. The house had been forced to acknowledge the truth of its origin, but without the evidence, it couldn't fully process the reckoning, leaving it in a state of stasis. Agnes nodded slowly, a dark understanding in her eyes. The structure is inert. But the ledger is still active. The house is not gone, detective. It's just dormant. You are still the collector. Leo looked back at his new house, his new prison. The oak door was still there. The mail slot was silent. I'm the worst kind of collector, Leo said, holstering his weapon. The one who knows how the system works but refuses to collect. I own the house now. And my new rule is simple: the door stays closed.